The man was terrified to discover that the hotel seemed to shrink a little every night. To test his theory, he tied a rope between two walls. The next morning, the once tight rope had gone slack. The rope itself hadn't changed, so the only explanation was that the walls had moved closer together. He immediately shared this dreadful news with all the chefs. Even more horrifying, the hotel had no exit. The chefs and guests had lived there for over 10 years without ever leaving. If the shrinking continued, they would eventually be crushed, buried alive within these walls. Strangely, no one seemed to care except him. When he tried to warn them, the chefs united and threw him out of the kitchen. Mr. K was a traveling magician who happened to be passing through a small town. He had a magic show scheduled for tomorrow at the local cafe and decided to stay overnight at a nearby hotel. At the front desk, he was greeted by an elderly woman with one eye. Mr. K checked into a single room and went to bed early that night, resting up for his big performance the next day. The next morning, Mr. K packed up 2 large suitcases ready to leave the hotel. But no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find the exit. The staircase he had used to come upstairs the night before was now completely blocked by a solid wall. Judging by its worn appearance, it wasn't newly built either. Just as he was puzzling over this, the old pipes suddenly began to shake, clanking metal against metal. Then the walls themselves started to tremble. Mr. K pressed his ear close, hearing a powerful, steady thumping, like the beating of a giant heart. Suddenly, the hallway lights flickered and small doors began opening along the base of the walls. Out of nowhere, a full band emerged, playing lively music and moving steadily toward Mr. K. Bewildered by all these strange happenings, he didn't want to cause trouble. So he picked up his luggage and stepped aside to make way for the band. But just around the corner, he accidentally bumped into a waiter carrying a tray of food. Without hesitation, the waiter handed the tray over to Mr. K, who had no choice but to take it. And just like that, Mr. K inexplicably became part of the hotel's kitchen staff. He followed the team leader, Melinda, into the bustling kitchen. Besides the busy chefs rushing around, what caught his attention the most were the ingredients. It seemed like every dish involved some kind of egg. Chicken eggs, duck eggs, goose eggs, quail eggs. All kinds of eggs were continuously delivered from a conveyor belt straight into the kitchen. Standing there, completely lost, Mr. K was suddenly forced by Melinda to put on an apron and start working. Reluctant as he was, his presence stirred jealousy among the others. He quickly explained that he was just passing through, but across from him, Anton suddenly lowered his head, focused intensely on his work as if he had seen something terrifying, and stopped talking altogether. Mr. K glanced over and saw the head chef standing nearby, watching them all with a stern expression. But Mr. K didn't care at all. Right in front of the head chef, he started performing magic tricks. The head chef glanced at him a few times before quietly walking away. The chefs all lived together in a communal dormitory. Though the living conditions were far from ideal, they always found ways to enjoy themselves after work, singing and dancing with whatever instruments they could get their hands on. Mr. K, caught up in the same joy, suddenly had his moment interrupted by a strange noise coming from the building itself. When he looked around, it seemed like no one else had noticed the sound except for him. Curious, he stepped outside and listened closely, trying to find where it was coming from. The noise sounded like 2 walls pressing inward, causing the wooden boards to creak and crack. Mr. K made a bold guess and stretched out his arms, trying to measure the width of the hallway. To his shock, he couldn't touch both walls at the same time. He shook his head and gave a bitter laugh, thinking maybe he was just imagining things. Later, when he went to the bathroom, the door behind him suddenly started to turn from the outside. Luckily, Mr. K always locked the door when he went in, so whoever was outside couldn't get in. The person on the other side spoke nonsense, calling him things like liberator and savior, but Mr. K couldn't make any sense of it all. No sooner had Mr. K spoken than the vent grill at the bottom of the door was pushed open, and several hands reached inside, trying to grab him. No matter how much he kicked with his feet, those hands kept fumbling around, searching. It wasn't until Mr. K said, "I'm nothing," that the hands finally stopped moving and disappeared back outside the door. He had no idea what had happened out there. Wanting to avoid any more trouble, Mr. K curled up in the corner of the bathroom and fell into a deep sleep. He didn't wake until the next day when Anton knocked on the bathroom door. As he woke, Mr. K noticed some graffiti on the opposite wall. Anton explained it was drawn by the children who lived in the hotel. Back in the kitchen, Mr. K absent-mindedly asked Anton where the exit was, but Anton stammered and couldn't give him a clear answer. Anton had been working there for 7 years and had never once left the hotel. Mr. K's attention was suddenly caught by a familiar figure, the old one-eyed woman from the front desk. He hurried after her, desperate to ask about the exit. But just 2 seconds too late, she vanished into thin air. Frustrated and angry, Mr. K stormed over to the head chef and demanded to quit. But the chef's reaction caught him completely off guard. The head chef then suddenly stood up and pulled Mr. K into a tight embrace. Leaning close, he whispered something in Mr. K's ear. Though Mr. K didn't fully understand what was happening, he saw an old man with white hair kneeling before him, begging him to stay. No matter how much Mr. K wanted to leave, he found himself reluctantly putting those thoughts aside. That night, Mr. K returned to his room and laid down on the bed, carefully observing his surroundings. He noticed something strange. The size of the room seemed to have changed. To test his suspicion, he tied a rope tightly between 2 walls. The next morning, he woke up with a start to find that the rope, which had been taut, had collapsed to the floor. This confirmed his worst fear. The room and the whole building was shrinking. But instead of feeling relieved or amazed by this strange discovery, Mr. K let out a long sigh. Deep down, he sensed that the shrinking building might be a sign that something even more terrifying was about to happen. Without hesitation, Mr. K shared his unsettling discovery with Anton. As they walked down the hallway, they saw something strange. In every room, people were moving their furniture outward, struggling to adjust to the shrinking space. To prove to Anton that the hotel was indeed shrinking, Mr. K stretched out his arms and stood right in the middle of the hallway. This time, both his hands could touch the opposite walls at the same time. Compared to the day before, the distance between the walls had shrunk by nearly the length of 2 palms. Anton looked utterly confused by Mr. K's actions, but said nothing and hurried off to start his shift. When they arrived at the kitchen together, they found chaos waiting for them. What used to be a simple, organized workflow had become cramped and crowded. The chefs kept bumping into each other, struggling to move in the tighter space. Determined to find answers, Mr. K approached the head chef and suggested forming search teams to investigate why the building was shrinking. But the head chef flatly refused, saying the guests were waiting for breakfast and they couldn't afford distractions. Frustrated, Mr. K climbed onto a table and explained the strange situation to his coworkers, hoping someone would understand and offer help. Instead, his plea was met with unified rejection. The other chefs banded together and pushed him out of the kitchen. Standing outside the door, Mr. K felt crushed, not just because nobody believed him, but because he had once again lost the chance to escape the hotel. On his way back to the room, Mr. K ran into an elderly couple, both wearing lace-trimmed clothing. The 2 frail seniors were struggling to carry a sofa out of their room. Ever the helpful soul, Mr. K immediately stepped in to lend a hand. They recognized him as the young man who had been searching for the front desk, and, as a gesture of thanks before leaving, they whispered something to him, something about a miracle. Mr. K couldn't quite make sense of it and just assumed the old couple was a bit senile. Back in his room, the sound of the symphony orchestra returned. The band was still singing and dancing down the hallway. At the same time, the chefs, led by the head chef, were rhythmically banging utensils in sync with the music. The hotel's pipes and windows began to vibrate, their frequencies perfectly blending with the orchestra, creating a cacophony that relentlessly assaulted Mr. K's eardrums. Even covering his ears didn't bring any relief. Meanwhile, the elderly woman from the front desk danced gracefully somewhere unseen, while the lace-clad couple exchanged loving looks and sang along. Suddenly, the shrinking building began to squeeze the windows tighter and tighter, causing the glass to shatter under the pressure. After getting up, Mr. K looked out toward the courtyard and saw countless windows shattering one after another. The shockwaves from the explosions knocked him down again. He realized he couldn't wait any longer. If he did, this hotel would literally crush him to death. Determined to find an exit, he started marking the hallway walls and tried to sketch out a map of the building. But behind the torn wallpaper, something indescribable was revealed. Mr. K carefully peeled back the wallpaper to uncover a tangled mass of fleshy tentacles writhing inside the stone walls. Feeling uneasy, he cautiously pressed on the wriggling mass, which immediately bulged in response. The disgusting, organic substance made him feel even more unsettled. Grabbing the sharp edge of a metal tray, he sliced into the bulging growth. With a piercing scream echoing through the hotel, the lights flickered wildly and the pipes burst as if the building itself was in pain. Without hesitation, Mr. K hurried back to his room. No sooner had he left the spot than the old woman from the front desk appeared, her face filled with sorrow as she gently caressed the wounded mass. At some point, the word Liberator had been scrawled right outside Mr. K's door. When he finally pushed it open, he found nearly all the hotel's residents had gathered inside his room. It seemed they had made him their only hope for escaping the hotel. With nowhere else to go, Mr. K had no choice but to lie down and sleep in the hallway outside his own door. As he rested, the wallpaper above him suddenly peeled off and drifted down, landing on him like a thin, fragile blanket. The next morning, the shrill ringing of a telephone jolted him awake. Filled with hope, he rushed inside, believing this call might be his one chance to get out. But the young man closest to the phone told the caller it was a wrong number and completely ignored Mr. K's pleas before slamming the receiver down. Furious, Mr. K grabbed the phone, listening to the irritating buzzing on the other end. He erupted in anger, berating the young man and then using a mop to force everyone out of the room. Leaning against the door, he looked back to see that the room had visibly shrunk since he'd first entered. The architectural map of the hotel that he had painstakingly drawn lay torn on the floor. Feeling numb, Mr. K collapsed onto the now-collapsed bed and stared blankly ahead. Suddenly, the light above Mr. K began to spin wildly before falling from the ceiling, nearly striking him. Where the light had hung, there was now a round hole, and to his surprise, the two elderly figures with lace-trimmed clothes peeked out from inside. They knew Mr. K was struggling to find a way out and took on the role of comforting sisters, offering words of encouragement. But Mr. K was already feeling defeated and had nearly given up hope. Who would have thought that behind the wardrobe in his room, there was actually a hidden passage? The walls inside this narrow tunnel seemed to writhe and pulse, like the intestines of the house itself. Mr. K stood frozen for a long moment before summoning the courage to step inside. He didn't know what awaited him at the end, but with no other options left, this passage was his only chance, his faint hope of escape. Carefully, he crawled to the tunnel's end, only to find a massive egg lying there. Just then, other residents burst through the door, crashing into the room. When the creature inside the egg finally turned its head, Mr. K recognized it from the lore. It was Cthulhu. According to the records, Cthulhu's head was covered in writhing tentacles like those of an octopus. Its chilling cries were treated by the residents as divine prophecy, prompting them all to kneel and worship. Despite seeing such a strange and terrifying creature, Mr. K surprisingly didn't feel fear. Instead, he was filled with a deep sense of awe and wonder at the birth of new life. When he gently touched the egg, he could almost sense the thoughts of the Cthulhu creature inside. This hotel wasn't just a building, it was alive. The strange shrinking of the hotel was caused by the egg growing inside it. As the egg grew, it compressed the surrounding spaces, which explained the eerie shrinking phenomenon. One by one, the residents stumbled into the passage, completely unaware of what was under their feet. They kept stepping on the writhing tentacles, which seemed to be the egg's most sensitive area. The creature cried out in pain again and again. Determined to save the Cthulhu from the oblivious residents, Mr. K mustered all his strength and pushed the egg out of the passage. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself deep under the ocean, surrounded by Cthulhu itself. The creature wrapped him tightly in its tentacles and carried him toward the shimmering light above the sea.